Okay, cool. So welcome to SpongeBob World. So I know that this lab brought some of you moments of aha and some of you moments of deep despair. And that is okay, because the lab was much more difficult, than anything we did so far. The good news is that when you look at it on Wednesday, you will be just like, oh, it was so easy. I don't know how, how come I was struggling back then. And yeah, there's one more thing. There's one thing about this lab that I didn't know. I love the lab. I have good knowledge of it. However, it was updated recently, and so something that many of you struggled with, and is that if we want to run, so in the README they say that we should be using console, right, file. But then if we do cd to tools, and then wait, where are we? Oh yeah, first I need to cd to Ruby OO relationships. So cd Ruby OO relationships, and then cd to tools. And now I want to run Ruby console.rb. It will give me an error, no such file to load app. So we can actually solve this in two ways, and I will tell you why the problem occurs. This is not something that you should be solving, and I already edited out the lab so that the next cohorts are not going to have such a problem. But basically, if you look at here, it tells us that in the console file should be already connected with all the other files. And it's the config environment that takes care of that. So now let's see what's in config environment. If we look here, we see require bundler setup, and then bundler require. So we'll be talking about bundler and bundling next week on, most probably on Thursday. And then we have bundler basically just installs all the gems that you are going to be using in your lab, or like your app, or. And then you have require all app. So that says that basically we should, that this console file that loads environment file should know about everything that's inside the app. But you see, what actually the problem is that the environment file, as you see here, it is not on the same level as app. So we need to actually provide the relative path for that. And so now it's working. So yeah, that's the issue. I really didn't know about that. It was just updated. It was just updated, and so that's why the problem. However, there's another way to go about that. You could create a new file in app, right? So you could create a run.rb, and in run.rb you could just connect everything with the models, meaning you could do require, and then you would require pry, right? And then you would just either require all. So we are requiring the gem require all, and then require all models, right? We can just call models because it is the run file is on the same level as models, right? So what do you feel more comfortable with? Do you want to use the runner in the app, or do you want to use the console file in tools? Maybe if you could just take a stand in the chat, then I will know what to do. Okay, run.rb. Run. Okay. Is there anyone who would prefer console very strongly? I can just later on record another version of this. Cool, so for now we'll be using run.rb. So let's forget about everything else. Okay, so now I will, in order to prepare such a run file, we need to, oh, I see. I see, Hortensia, you prefer console. I will just, I will also show how to do the same stuff from the console, but also later on record the same. Okay, thank you. Okay, so require all models. So now I am, in order to prepare a runner file, I need to first require the pry because I will be using pry heavily, and so should you. Then I will require all the gem. And then through this gem, I will require all the files that are in the models folder, right? And I can require models because it is on the same level as runner, right? You see, it's not indented. Okay, so now I will start the binding.pry. I will just include binding.pry in this file and add an additional line afterwards, because otherwise binding.pry will not work if it is the last line. But now I want to just check whether it is possible for me to whether these files are actually connected with the runner. So first I need to check whether I have any classes. I have boating school, instructor, and student. And so now first I need to go to the, you see, like I am in tools right now. So I am in this file, a folder. I need to navigate back to app. So first cd tool, and now cd app. So from this app level, I can just run ruby run.rb. And let's see where I am. I am on line 7 in the run file. So I am where I thought I would be, right? And so here I will just create a new instance of instructor .new. If it is not erroring out, so if it is actually creating a new instance of instructor, that means that this file is connected to runner, right? But it is contingent on me having the class instructor. And now student, cool. And now boating test. Yeah, so all the files are connected, awesome. So I just did my environment setup, and with that, I can move on to README. So the good news is that majority of time you shouldn't be doing, I mean, you will not be required to do environment setup. So that's the good news. Let me, I will open now my terminal and navigate to this folder, because I think it's better to have code on left and then terminal on the right side. And now, oh, thank you. And cd 11.5 and cd ruby and cd app, right? Okay, so now this can become a split screen. I will make it bigger and split screen. And this is another screen. Cool, now we are prepared. So let's look at our README. So welcome to Boating School, a SpongeBob activity that simulates a system that tracks boating tests. We have 3 models: student, instructor, and boating test. Associations. Oh, they already drew the associations. That's great. So I know that this is a student can have many boating tests. And then boating test can have many instructors. I mean, belongs to an instructor, and instructor can have many boating tests. Instructor, right? So instructor has many boating tests, and student has many boating tests, and boating test belongs to both student and instructor. Okay, so these are our deliverables. We have deliverables for student class, for boating test class, for instructor class, and note the status has 3 options only: passed, failed, and pending. Okay, we can run Ruby tools console. Okay. Oh, and they are giving us seed data example. So I see that we have a seed data for creating a new student, for creating a new instructor, and for add boating test methods. Okay, Good. So I will copy this to our runner file. And so now, if you are a person who likes structure, I would and like who likes process, I would tell you that first, whenever you're approaching any lab, you really need to start with this. Write down the associations, draw the domain model. Really do that, because it is easy sometimes when you're under stress or when you're tired to just, to forget which one is a joiner. And not every lab is so straightforward, right? And then what I usually do, I just copy this deliverables to every file, right? So I have deliverables for student. I will just copy them underneath, and I will comment them out, just so that I can later go one by one, just I don't have to, so that I don't have to click back and forth, README and other files. It's just easier for me. It's easier to have everything in one place. And then there's also the instructor class. Cool. And that is it for our README. So in the instructor, I need to paste this. Okay, great. Okay, so now question for you: where do you want to start? Where do you think we should start? Should we start at the student, instructor, or boating test? Student, boat, student, boat, student or instructor, boating test. Okay, well, I personally would usually start with the shortest one, just to have a feeling of accomplishment. So since there are more or less the same votes for both boating school and student, let's start with the boating school, because this is just, two deliverables. That being said, starting with a student or instructor also makes sense, because then you can actually already test boating test, right? So generally when you write code, you should already test it. Now, when we write code for boating test, we won't be able to test it immediately, because in order to test it, we need to pass a student object and an instructor object. But, we can wait with testing for later, since this is like a very small, there are just two deliverables. So, the feedback loop will be fast. Okay, so now whenever you are trying to write a class, start with the initialize method, right? So we are starting with that, initialize. So let's read. Should we initialize with student, object, boating test name, string? Okay, this already looks very too much. So let's do it one step at a time. So student object, a boating test name, a boating test status, and an instructor object. Okay, now this is more readable. Awesome. So I am going to do just that. Student, then we have test name, test status, and instructor. Now, once you declare the parameters, you should actually create the instance variables, right? So let's do that. So I am just copying the name of the parameter and then saving it as an instance variable, just like this. And instructor. And we don't need this. Okay. Now that we have the instance variables, we can actually create the attribute macros. What do you think? Do you think that, is there anything that should not be attribute accessor? My gut feeling usually is, my first instinct always is, oh, let's make everything attribute accessor and then let's change. So student, should it be attribute accessor or attribute reader? I would say that usually when you don't have anything like clearly defined, like for example, if they don't tell you, oh, it should never change, you know, you can just follow your gut. So for now, let's just make everything an attribute accessor. But just to make it clear, if we make it all of those instance variables, if we make them attribute accessors, then it means that we can override them, right? So we need to be conscious of that. Cool. Okay. And now we see, so we already have this part, and now voting test all returns an array of all voting tests. So for this, I have, of course, a recipe. First, write the method and tell Ruby, the method and tell Ruby that it is a class method by calling self. Self.all. And this method will return an instance, a class variable @all, which we first need to write. I like to write my @all here, but it really doesn't matter. You can even declare it somewhere here, no problem. So @all equals empty array initially, and now that we created space for instances, we can actually push the newly created instance to @all. Okay, so yay, we already finished one class. Yay! We could say 1/3 of the way done, but sadly this is not reflective of truth. Okay, so now let's move to student. Now, our goal for now, once we have the smallest one done, our goal for now is to test the smallest one. For that, we will not be doing all the deliverables from student and from instructor immediately. We will just do the bare minimum, right? So I would say that this is the bare minimum. So again, like, so should the initialize method and @all, right? So again, initialize, it should initialize with a name. And for me, I will write student name just because later when I want to, I don't know, if I call, for example, Patrick, I want to say that Patrick has a name, has an attribute of student name. And in that case, it is going to be just easier for me to remember that it's a student. It's actually not a huge issue because when you call Patrick, you will also see, you know, student with a capital S, but I don't know. I know that I get very scatterbrained sometimes and I prefer to be safe, right? But you can just call it name and it's fine as well, right? It doesn't matter. Whatever works well for you. And now, okay, and now that we created instance variable, it is good to create, to have attribute macro. Name can be changed, so let's do accessor name. And I don't see anywhere any mention of that name should never be changed, right? Okay, so now the second deliverable is @all. So again, I'm writing a class method and telling Ruby that it's a class method by including the self. And this method will return @all variable. This is a class variable. So I need to create it. @all equals empty array. I'm making space for all the instances to, you know, hang out. And now whenever a new instance is created, it will be pushed to @all array.
Hey, Sylvia.
For
other assessor, right, Dong and Franklin pointed out that it should be student name instead of name.
Thank you. See? We are getting somewhere from since yesterday. Thank you so much. Now I feel like finally people have my back. Okay, great. Yeah, you know, my boss Signy also saw that video from yesterday. So yeah, we had lots of fun. Yeah, great. So student name, thank you. Yeah, great. So now we are. I assume that it is going to be the same for the instructor. So I just copy this and this code. And then I am checking out the instructor. So instructor should initialize with a name and instructor all should return all instructors. So it's almost the same, except that it shouldn't be student, it should be instructor. Right? Okay, so now we have finished the basic setup for our testing, just to see whether we can actually create stuff. So now I would go to runner file and start binding.pry and try to create different instances of different classes. So we already are given the 2 students and 2 instructors. I would actually add another student and another instructor. So who do you want to see as an instructor and who do you want to see as a student? Give me some ideas. Who's your childhood hero? Sandy. Okay, Eric and Sandy. I don't know who Sandy is. Eric equals student.new. Eric and Sandy equals instructor.new. Sandy. Okay, we already have Patrick here. Okay, so now we can already create test data either in the runner file or in binding.pry. I will show you both ways. So first test, and now I don't remember what are the arguments I need to invoke voting test new with, right? So because of that, I will do split screen right now, and just to have it as a reference. So I see that this is going to be student, test name, test status, and instructor. I will just copy this, close the split screen, and paste it as a comment. So voting test.new, and the first instance will be, the first argument will be student, then the test name will be intro to both. Now test status will be pending, and finally instructor will be crabs, or actually, yeah. Okay, so now we created one voting test, and let's test our test, right? So I will run, what's going to happen now, I will run Ruby Ruby space run.rb, and then Ruby will go into this file, will read it all, and hit this binding.pry. I mean, this will happen if it all works well, right? Okay, so it works well. But now, before we move on, I want to show you what would happen if it didn't work well. So let's say I also have this method here, add voting test. I haven't written this method yet, right? And so if I call Ruby run RB, I will get undefined method add voting test. That means don't panic, just go to the line 18 and see why that could be. Okay, so now Ruby run RB, I am here. So I need to test all six deliverables that I covered. So I already know, so I need to see whether this different students and different instructors and voting tests were created. And I also need to see whether I am able to call .all, right? So let's do student.all. And I see that there are 3 students, so I see that they were created. Okay. Now instructor.all, I see that I have 3 instructors, just like here, so they were all created. And now voting test.all, it is just one with 1 instructor and 1 student, right? So now let's just check whether I can access the first ones. I don't know. I see that I have an instance variable student, so .student. Yes, awesome. So everything is connected, everything works. That is very satisfying. I will get back now to full screen on the code. So now we can actually have fun and see, other methods. Who do you want to start with first, instructor or student? Karate. Okay, that means instructor. Great. So in the instructor class, we have a couple of methods to write. So first one is past students should return an array of students who passed a voting test with this specific instructor. Instructor past students should take in a student instance and test name. Okay, there's fail students, so those two are actually very similar. And then instructor all students should return an array of students who took a voting test with this specific instructor. So I actually think that this deliverable is very connected to this one, right? Because if you look at our domain model, it is instructor. Instructor has many voting tests, and voting test belongs to a student, right? So in order to go from instructor to a student, we will need to do two steps, right? First, get all the voting tests of the instructor, and from those voting tests, we'll need to get all the students of the instructor. And then from all the students of the instructor, we'll need to get all the past students, right? So let's do just that. So pseudocoding. I will copy this name just so that you will know what we are pseudocoding about. Okay, so all students. One, since we are on the instructor class, you see that we are on the instructor class, get all the instructors tests. Two, so maybe first access voting test.all and get all the instructors tests. Second, from the instructors test, get all the students. So that's what we are gonna do, right? So if I have like two steps like this, I usually, you see, because I'm doing, in Ruby, every single method should be responsible just for doing just one job. And that would be like in the perfect world scenario, you would have one method just do one job. Here we have two different jobs. One is accessing the voting test, right? And getting the instructor's test. You could even split those two into two steps, right? But for me, this kind of connects. However, this one is like entire different story. So that for me is a call to have a helper method. So I will say instructors, or maybe all tests. Because I decided to call it all tests because I have all students, right? So it kind of makes sense. So this is what I am going to do. First, access voting test.all. So voting test.all and get all the instructors' tests, meaning I have a pool of voting tests and I need to just make it, just choose a few from that, which is a call for a method called select, right? And so I'm going to be iterating over a test, over an array of tests. So one would be test. And now you see, we can be either sure that it's going to be test dot something, right? Test dot instructor. But I would like to actually call you, I would like to make a call to you and ask you not to be confident when coding, and instead just put a binding.pry. So in order for this binding.pry inside the method to work, I need to first require pry at the top of the file. Require pry. So now question, how can we access, this pry in here? One way would be to like run this file, but that would be more difficult and also more confusing. There's actually an easier way. Yeah, I can invoke the method, and I could invoke this method where? In run RB, yes. So this method is called all tests. and it is a method on an instance of an instructor, right? We know that it is a method on the instance because it is not starting with the name, with the word self, but also if you look in here, it is a hash and not a dot. So it is an instance method. An instance method means that I need to take an instance of an instructor, such as, for example, path, and call this method on path. So I will now split screen, and I will run Ruby run RB. And as you see, what happened was I called Ruby run RB, this file, but this file was reading the code from top to the bottom and was executing this code, and then realized that there is this method all tests. It tried to execute it. If you look, it encountered a binding.pry, and that's where we froze. You can know where you are always, because if you look in the pry, there is always, a hint where we currently are. Okay, so now let's do, and I'm not kidding, I always do it this way. I really do. I always, whenever I'm writing any longer code, I would always go just one step at a time. So first I want to check whether boltingtest.o exists. And I know that we did that like 5 minutes ago, but please be ultra safe. Yes, it exists. So now select. And so I will do test, right? So now, what do you think? So we see that there is the attribute of instructor, right? And so I can actually call the test dot instructor and compare it to the self, right? So let's do that. And now let's see who the self is. Self is Mrs. Path. So let's see whether Mrs. Path has actually any boating test. As we see, it's only Krabs who has boating test, right? So now let's call. So we see that this actually returns correct data, meaning empty array, because Path doesn't have any boating test. Okay. So, but we don't know whether actually our code works. We know that it works only for this situation. So in order to test it better, we can just change this to Krabs, who actually has Krabs, who actually has tests. So now let's check who self is. Self is Mr. Krabs. And now we can run the same code. Boating test all, select, test instructor equals self. And we see that we get 1, right? So this is information for us that this works. We copy this code from binding.pry. We go back to the instructor file. And now we can paste it here. Now, yesterday I told you that I like to have different numbers of the joiner for every character, and that is exactly because sometimes your code would work and it would appear like it works correctly, but you don't see it because there are so many different examples, right? So it's better to have at least one example with at least one instance without any joiners, just to see whether it actually whether it doesn't break in general, if there is no value, but also what happens if, what happens if an instance doesn't have any joiners. So it's good to know. Okay, so we know that this method, all tests, actually works. It returns the test of Krabs. So now we already did this part. And now I will copy this in here, just so you know that it belongs together. And now we have all students. So now get the instructor's test, get all students from that, right? So we can do binding.pry. And again in the run file, we need to call this method. So it is going to be crabs.allStudents. Okay. So now look at this. We are actually in allStudents method. You see instructor 27, all students, right? So now we can first let's check who self is, just to make sure that that self is what we think it is. We assume that it is going to be Mr. Krabs because we called all students on Mr. Krabs. Okay. So now we'll go one step at a time. So first, from this method, we need to access all the tests. So we can do it differently. We can either do all tests, or we can do self.all_tests. I prefer to be very explicit, so I will write self.all_tests. But all tests also works. So it is really your preference. So I will clear the terminal and just bring this this data back. So now what we need to do, so we only have just one test right now, and that's okay. But from this one test, we need to get the instance of the student, right? So it is still an array. So we need to iterate over it, even if we have just one student. So we will iterate over it using map. And we are iterating over an array of tests. So one would be test and test.student. Okay. So this is the code that I want to check. And I am getting back an instance of a student, right? I mean, an array of just students. So this is happy news. Now, map has an additional syntax. So let's do that. So it's going to be self.allTest.map. And now pretzel : student. This pretzel : thing means that, this pretzel : student means that I'm telling Ruby, hey Ruby, you see there's repetition here, just skip it and immediately go to the attribute of student. Let's see whether it still works. It still works. So this is our all students method. We can, now that it works, we can take out binding.pry. And at this point, I would actually create another voting test for Mr. Krabs. Let's just, let's change the name just so that I don't have to write first, second, third, because it already is tiring. And so the first one, the second test will be with Patrick and also with Mr. Krabs, and it's going to be pass. Was it supposed to be pass or passed? Let's see. Or maybe they have here passed. Okay. So it should be passed. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Franklin. Yeah, so passed. So we already have two tests. It's good to have a few just to, see whether it works. So now if I call Krabs all students, I will get 2 students, just like I expected. If I call Puff all students, I will get nothing because Puff doesn't have any students. Okay. So now I'll go to full screen in the editor. So we know that this already works. We don't need that anymore. Let's look at our next deliverable. So passed students should return an array of students who passed a voting test with this specific instructor. Okay, so we are taking it to the next level. So now we'll use again, we'll use another method. So all students to just return the students who have the pass score. Because before we do that, we will do binding.pry. And now in the run method name, no, let's do past students method name. Okay, and now in our runner file, we will call Krabs.past students. And now, before we test it, I want to, when you're doing something that requires a couple of steps, like for example, in the current method, we are writing a method pass students that depends on another method, all students that depends on another method, all tests that depends on another method, voting test.all. I would say, before testing, just sit with yourself and think what a success will look and what a failure will look, right? So success is I will get only Patrick, right? And a failure will look I will get Patrick and SpongeBob, or nothing, or yeah. So it's good to know what you are expecting for the success to be. And in this moment, I actually realized that perhaps my approach is not perfect, because what I just suggested would be a long way. Look at this. The information about whether a test is passed or pending, it actually lives on the voting test. Because of that, perhaps I shouldn't be invoking all students, because this all students method will only give me the instances of students with no information on how they did, right? So perhaps my method pass students should should depend on all tests and not on all students. Okay? Is this clear? Do you have any questions about this? How can I make it clearer? Ask me questions. Okay, let's call this, I will now, in the runner file, I will access this method past students. So what would the code in the method be changed to? We'll just write it right now. So my suggestion is that we won't be approaching it from all students, but all tests. But let's see whether my suggestion actually has any, is grounded in any, logic. So let's copy the name past students, and now we will invoke it with crabs, right? So now I will split screen, and now I will call Ruby runner RB that will invoke this method that will in turn go to the method with the binding with pride. So as you see, I am in the method past students. So now initially I wanted to do self.all_students. But how can I choose from all students only those students who have passed? I would have to iterate over that and check every single student's voting test, choose from those voting tests the tests that were taken with this specific instructor, and then from those voting tests, I would have to choose the tests that were passed, which sounds like an overkill given the fact that we already have self.all tests, right? So perhaps right now we will need to select test, and see we have this status, test status pending. Test status equals passed, right? So now we will get all the past tests, and from that, so let's copy this. So let's go back to the instructor class. And so from there, we will need to again do, we will again need to map, right? So we can either save it to a variable. So let's say past tests equals what I did previously, right? So I just saved it to a variable. And now over those past tests, so let's call past tests. You see that I am getting just one test because we have one past test. And from this past test, I will just map over them and take out just the student. So test.student. And I am getting the student. So I'm doing basically the same as I did here, right? From all tests, from all possible tests, I'm only choosing the ones that are, I'm choosing all the students that ever took the exam. And now from all tests, I am choosing the ones that, that were a past test, and from there I am getting the students, right? So we can actually create a helper method, all past tests, and copy this code here, and then invoke this method, all past tests, and map just to get the student, right? So now we will, oops, not here. So now we'll exit the pry and see whether this works, because we introduced so many different changes. Now, I have an assumption that this code works. Because of that, I will move the binding.pry afterwards, because then binding.pry will already know about this line of code. Okay, so now, actually, I still have to copy it because it's not saved to a variable, so I cannot call it, right? Okay. So as you see, I am getting Patrick, and let's see whether Patrick is actually the person that that passed. Yes. So this is how the success for this method looks. Okay. So it is. Sorry. Let's go to the instructor. So it is always good to talk to yourself about what steps you want to take, just so that you don't code. You saw me earlier that I almost was like, yeah, let's just code it and let's write it. And then midway, I would be frustrated because my initial approach would prove, wrong, and I wouldn't know why. So always just ask yourself what a success looks, what a failure may look, and what steps you want to take, even if it is a simple method, 1 second. I see a question. Should we get used to coming up with our own helper method depending on the deliverables? Because in many methods, we had to do multiple loops because we didn't create a helper methods. Yeah, you shouldn't. You shouldn't have multiple loops. You should have just one helper method. So you should have just one method do one job, right? So create helper methods. Actually, in the Ruby world, and I will be telling you about that a lot in Mod 2 when you will be already, more comfortable with code. In Ruby world, Sandy Metz is one of the main gurus and author of amazing books. And so she came up with this set of rules for Rubies. And those are recommendations, and majority of the companies that write code in Ruby, they actually follow her recommendations. So one of the recommendations is that in Ruby, a method should not be longer than 5 lines unless you have a very good reason to. And so that means that methods oftentimes should be, composed of other methods that are helper methods. This is because it makes the code better when it comes to readability, but also easier to debug. Okay. Yeah, I will select the book. Or Annie will. One of us will. Cool. So I always recommend helper methods. Some people say that in JavaScript you don't need helper methods. I could not disagree more. And if you write JavaScript, initially you can write JavaScript code that is 700 lines, not joking, or like 100 lines. That's okay. But once you feel a little bit comfortable with JavaScript, please hold yourself to some standards and try to keep your methods, your functions succinct. Yeah. Okay. I see that maybe we should have a break. So let's introduce some break. 3 minutes. Okay. Before we move on. Cool. So now we are tackling 2 methods that are kind of similar. The first one is pass student, and another one is fail student. And so I'll go on full screen in here. I'll copy these two deliverables higher so that I will not have to be scrolling too much. Okay, so I see that I have two methods that basically require me to find the student and then create a new test for the student, and either pass it or fail, pass the student or fail the student. So there are so many different ways to approach it, you know. But I see that one of the steps that we will need is one, find the student, and then second, pass student or fail student. So let's you see, like those are two different jobs, or actually this can be those two can be two separate jobs, right? So we have three different jobs. So let's tackle it one step at a time. So first, the find student is going to be a helper method. So find student. We'll achieve that by going to the student.
Hey, Sylvia.
Hey, yes.
Your screen is frozen.
Oh, really? How about now? 1 second.
Now, yep, we can see it now.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So find student will be a helper method for pass student and fail student. By the way, you know, when I am taking any timed assessment, like a code challenge or any test, I actually do take, like, I don't know, 15 to 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the time, to really read the README and draw everything out. And because of that, it is easy later for me to keep a very well-organized code and also actually finish very fast. Because if your code is organized, then you're spending less time debugging, right? So I would recommend for everyone to, I know that you have an instinct to just go and code, but before you do that, just first draw everything, you know, out and read the README at least twice just to see how everything connects. Okay, so I will achieve finding the student by one, go to the student.all. To find the student. And so this actually tells me that most probably I'll need a student name, right? So, because I need to find the student somehow. But let's actually read this once again. So instructor pass student should take in, and okay, so I will just, I don't deal too well with too long text. So arguments, actually parameters, a student instance and a test name. Okay, cool. So now, if there is a voting test whose name and student match the values passed in, oh, so there's going to be a condition. Okay, condition. Okay, voting test exists. Name and student with this name and student match the values passed in. This method should update. Okay. Then update the status of the voting test to pass. Good. If there is no matching test, okay. Second condition, no matching test. This so this method should create. So create a test with the student, the both test name, and the status passed. Either way, it should return the, okay. This will just keep in case it is not returning. Okay, cool. So now, so I will need to find a student, and the student only has one attribute, and that's a student name. But let's see how they gave us in seed data. They gave us an example of how we will be invoking the method pass student. So let's look at that. We'll do SpongeBob Oh, but that's add voting test. Okay, they didn't give us an example for instructor. I will change that later on. I will edit out in this lab. Okay, so find student with a name. So we'll go to the student.all. So I'm going to the student class and add to the method.all that returns the class variable. And in there, I want to find, because I just need one student, right? So find, now I need to iterate over it, student. And now student name. I remember that on my student class, the instance variable is called student name. Student name equals name. Okay. And now we need to write the method pass student. And in here, we'll do binding.pry. So now I will copy this. We see that this is an instance method, right? On the instance of an instructor. So let's again take, let's take Sandy.pass student. And let's think about what a success will look. I will be able to create a new voting test with 4 paths. Right, path, okay. And also second success, I will be able to update SpongeBob's test. So in this case, I will need to, as you see, I will need to invoke, because as you see, the pending test is with Krabs, the instructor Krabs. So because of that, I will need to invoke this method twice to test for 2 different cases, right? So let's do one step at a time. So first we'll
Sylvia?
Yes, hi.
Christy asked if the parameter should be student name in the instructor file.
Let me see. We can actually, this part?
Yeah.
This, oh, thank you. Name. This should be just name. Thank you. So student.student name. This student name comes from the instance variable. And here we can call this this variable, this parameter, whatever we want. We can call it name or student name. However, if we call it student name, oh, okay. However, if we call it student name, then it gets kind of like confusing. Ruby will know that this student name comes from here. But when we are tired, this looks all very confusing, you know? So I will just keep it as name.
You have student now in line 45.
Great. Okay, awesome. Thank you, teamwork. Cool, so now let's go back to our run RB. And we already said that the success, I will be able to create a new voting test for a pub, right? And failure, I will not. Or it will create a voting test for someone else. So now I will run Ruby run.rb, and then it will stop at pass student because there's an additional binding.pry. Okay, so now we are here. So so what do we need to do? Let's look at our steps. So we need to pass. Okay, our step is pass student or fail student. So let's do that. 1, create a voting test with the found student, right? So, you know, this is because the instructions are very unclear, because we don't know whether this pass student method whether it should look for a student instance or whether we are passing already a variable. You know, currently we are writing, as I'm writing it, I am writing this method in a way that it will look for a student with a specific name, right? So that's one way to go about it. So now we'll just create a new voting test. And so let's look what arguments in what order we need in order to create a new voting test. We need the student, right? So now I will copy this to the instructor file. Okay. So now the easy part would be create, voting school, a voting test dot new. And our arguments will be student, right? But now, how are we getting the student? We get the student equals find student name, right? Now, this name needs to come from the past student. So if we want to find the student, we will need to provide the past student method with the value of a name, right? We can even call it name string, just so that we will know name string. So now, Ruby will read this code and will find the student with the correct name string. So let's do that. Let's say we want, let's look what the names of our students are. Let's say Eric, okay. Or I said that we want to create a new voting test for Path. So let's do that. Or Path is actually an instructor. So let's do for Eric. Okay. So in here, first we will need to invoke the find student and save it to a student variable. So let's do that. Student equals find student, and it is going to be a string of Eric. So we have Eric. Yay, you know. Okay, so now our voting test new will take an instance of a student. We already found a student. It will take a test name. Let's say test name should come from the invocation of this method. So for example, test name string. So that's going to be the second argument. Then we have test status. So it is going to be test status string. Test status string. And then the fourth one is instructor. And we know that if we call self, we'll get an instance of an instructor with the instructor name of Sandy. So the fourth argument, we don't need to write Sandy, we can just write self. So now let's run, let's test. So we have this code written here, right? However, our whole method, as you see, depends on the three arguments, three parameters that we pass when we invoke this method. Because of that, we need to exit the pry, go to the runner file. Let's take this just so that we remember the order, and let's improve our invocation. So name string is going to be Eric. Test name string is going to be 101 Animal Crossing. I know that it was supposed to be about boats. And test status, and actually this test status string, it should be pass, right? Because we are saying pass student, and the instructions tell us that we should basically just pass a student. So we already know that the test status, this test status will be passed. So that's the good news. Okay. So because of that, we will be invoking the method only with two arguments, the name argument and then the test name argument. So if our method works, our success will be that we'll be able to create a new voting test for Eric. So let's see. Now, how our binding.pry is here. How can I check whether this has been created and whether it is a pass? I can go, for example, to voting test.all and check the last one. And we see that it is instructor Sandy, student name Eric, the test name is Animal Crossing, and the test status is passed. Dum, right? So this is good news. And now let's pass, actually, we can actually just pass another student. So let's let's say Sandy, pass student, and it is going to be, let's see who, Patrick. Oh, Patrick, okay, Patrick. So the first one will be Patrick, and then voting for pros, and that's it. Let's see whether this actually creates the new test. We see that it actually did create a new test, but just to be sure, just let's call voting test.all.last just to see whether it was created. Yeah. Okay, so we know that this part of our method works. So now we want to, just to have more tests, we can also just copy this for our seed data, since we know that it works. Okay, or maybe not. Okay, we can. Right, so Sandy now will have 2 students. So now we know that this part of our code works. It is a success. But now we will want to update the test of SpongeBob. So we will be invoking this method by passing the name of SpongeBob. And the test name was what? Was 101 boats. Okay, intro to boats. Cool. So now we need to see. First, we'll need to check whether there is such a test, right? So because of that, we can actually write a helper method, find test. And this is going to take a parameter of test name. So now we'll go to the test voting test.all, and we'll say .find, right? Now, okay, .find test, and now test dot. Let's see what the test attribute for name is. It's test name equals test name. See, like this is not perfect, so I will call it test name string or argument or parameter, whatever, just so. So now this is a little bit complicated because we will talk about a few different cases, right? We'll talk about the case where there is a voting test or when there is no voting test. So because of that, I would actually recommend that we just test it. So I will put a binding.pry here, binding.pry. And in past student, I will already comment out this binding.pry. So as soon as I invoke past student, this binding.pry will be invoked, and it will go to find test where there's another binding.pry. Okay? Or actually, we can do without this binding.pry, and instead we can just do find test, and then we'll be in this binding.pry. It really doesn't matter, you know, however you want to do it. But the most important point is that if you want to write some code, some method in this kind of sandbox manner, then you need to include binding.pry in that method and then invoke it wherever you want, right? So now I'm going to be testing different tests for existence, right? So let's see. So we are now in find test. So let's, oh, I will need to provide some test name, right? So let's say 101 boats. And now I will look for a boating test with the same name. So I see that this exists. Now I will change that the test name to something that I know that doesn't exist, right? And I will look for a test, voting test with this name, so it doesn't exist. So now I think that we need to actually create, make this a little bit more complex, because one course, like for example 101 boats, can be taken by a couple of different people, right? So I would say that I would include something like, let's check whether this boating test exists. And so for example, I would say, oh no, we can do it. We can actually do it in the other method, because this is going to make the code more readable. So we know that this find test method already works, and it actually returns what we want, either nothing or it returns the boating test that we were looking for. So let's leave the binding.pry, and let's go back to this one. Cool. So now we can actually save this to test equals find test, right? So test find test. Let's check what the test name string is. 101 Animal Crossing. Great. So now we know that this test doesn't yet exist, right? And so maybe we should change the test name string to something that we know that does exist. So 101 boats. Okay. So now let's find the test. Okay. So test exists. So now we need to say that if the test exists, right? If test and test dot, what was that student name? Oh no, student, 1 second. Test.student dot student name equals what we actually passed here. Then if this exists, then we want the test status to change to passed. So test status equals passed. Otherwise, we only have two conditions, so it can be if else. Otherwise, boating test, just create a new boating test for the student, right? We could actually, so let's do end. And now let's run this code in our sandbox just to see what we'll get. So we see that the 101 boats, earlier it was pending, now it's passed. Okay. So let's exit this. Let's clear the terminal. And now you can see that, yeah, so this is actually this method where you have two different conditions. You have the condition of first, if the test exists, and whether the test student name is the same as the name we invoked this method with, then you just change the test status to passed. But otherwise, you are just creating a new test. So now let's look into our run file, and we'll see that we have two different cases for success, right? We have one cases with Eric, where this should be a success, like the pass. And SpongeBob initially was pending, but now after we check it, it should be passed if our method runs. So now let's try boating test.all. And now we see that we need to look for the one with this that was taken by SpongeBob with the name of 101 boats. So where can it be? SpongeBob 101 boats passed. Yay! But you see, it was passed only here because earlier it was created as pending, and we saw that error, right? We also see that there is a test for Eric and one for Patrick, and both are passed. Cool. So now, there is another deliverable that is almost the same, right? It is fail student, which is basically the same but with failing. So we only have like 5 minutes left, a little bit more. But before we move on with these deliverables, let's see whether there's anything that I think we should cover. There's the add voting test. There's all instructors. All instructors is basically the same as all students, right? So you need to do it the same, but from the other side. So instead of going, instead of mapping over the test to find students, you need to map over the test to find instructors. Let's see. Find student, we already did that. Grade percentage, this is, I will just cover this separately. I would just recommend us to do the add voting test, because I know that some people sometimes just find the wording of this deliverable very confusing. So let's do that. Def add voting test. And so add voting test should initialize a new test with a student. So student, voting test name, and the last one will be status, test status, right? And an instructor. So this is the deliverable, right? They tell you to actually pass 4 things. But then if you look in the runner file, you will see that the C data that they gave you actually has just 3. So it has the test name, the status, and the instructor. It doesn't have the student. Now it doesn't have the student because we call, this is an instance method. We call this instance method on an instance of a student. So we don't need to pass the student as an argument. So what we need to do we need to just write voting test.new. And now we pass, the first one will be self. Then the next arguments are gonna be the ones that we already received. So now let's see whether this works. So let's put another binding.py here so that I'll be able to just copy paste every single line instead of just being, overwhelmed with 3 new tests. So binding.py, I'll move this here and split screen. I'll clear the terminal and now Ruby run. So as you see, I am in this binding.py, and now if this works, I should see a new test for SpongeBob. And you see that the student is SpongeBob. Now let's check this one. And you see that this is failed and it's for Patrick, just like we said. And the last one, it works. So that. And what questions do you have?
Emmanuel asks, will the complete code be included in the lecture notes /readme?
You mean like for all the deliverables or this one?
This one.
I will definitely, I will push it into, it's already in the, as you see, in 11.5 in the cohort repo. So you can check the code that I wrote. You can check it there.
And Anna before asked if you can explain line 55 to 56 again.
Which one? In student? Let's see, 55, no, it must
Oh, never mind. Anna said that you did it already. Sorry.
Okay, great.
And then Samantha asked, like, the deliverable says for a past student, for an instructor, said that it should take in a student instance and a test name, but I think you used the student string instead, the student name string.
Yeah, so this is, yeah, I think that they changed this recently because I think people were getting confused about that. You know, if we are passing only the student instance, then this makes our life so much easier because we don't need to find the student, right? We don't, this is a separate, this is an additional step, right? We no longer need to do that because we don't need to find the student instance. We get the student instance here, so that would be student, right? And instead of, we no longer need to, then we won't be comparing the student to student name, but just like test.student to the instance of student that was passed, right? And then we no longer need to even find the student. So, you know, that's definitely an easier, a faster, and more straightforward way. I will keep it longer. And also, you know, if on, for example, I don't know, if I don't think that, for example, if you were given such a test and I mean, it's not, I don't think, I know that if you go for a job interview and they expect you to do fulfill some deliverable one way, you do it a little bit different, but there's actually some logic to that. Then you know, that's not bad. This actually shows that you put a lot of thought into the whole process. But if the deliverable, if in this test, if in this lab deliverable asks you for a student instance, then definitely, you know, we don't have to go through the whole ordeal of finding the student and then, you know, comparing their name and then also finding the student again here. So this makes it easier. Okay. Okay. So I will stop the sharing. I will stop recording. And